With the American and Israeli offensive into Iran now stretching into its second week, Iran's conventional military capabilities are continuing to be degraded. According to reports, American and Israeli air power have now struck more than a combined 6,400 targets across Iran since this offensive began. Now, that shakes out to around 914 targets a day, meaning another target is being struck somewhere in Iran just about every 96 seconds for a week straight. Now, Iran's entire navy, including service and support vessels, ships in dry dock, ships in for repair and under construction, is said to include just 90 total vessels, only 67 of which are armed, and as of Friday, the United States had already struck 43 of them. Now, according to American officials, Iranian ballistic missile launches are now down 90% since the onset of fighting, with drone launches now down 83%, and with American air power now transitioning away from long-range standoff munitions in favor of shorter-range stand-in weapon systems, Iran's conventional military is only going to get weaker in the days ahead. But conventional military power isn't Iran's only offensive capability, and the longer-lasting threat may actually come from the work of Iran's highly secretive Cuds force and their network of terror groups throughout the region. But you guys know me, I tend to specialize in nuts and bolts, so I called in for reinforcements on this one.
Thanks, brother. Alex and I are covering some important topics today. I'll be giving you a breakdown of Iranian proxy forces and their most likely mission sets and targets.
I'm Alex Hollings.
And I am Mandatory Funday.
And this is Firepower. While fewer Iranian missiles and drones are still continuing to rain down on just about every nation within range, it's worth discussing a different Iranian threat that might well be the longer-lasting one. And that is the work of Iran's secretive Cuds force and the network of terror groups that they establish and support. Now, the Cuds Force is a branch of the elite Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that is formally tasked with unconventional warfare and military intelligence operations. Sort of like a combination of the American CIA and the US Army Special Forces. But they could be more informally described as the group that Iran uses to directly train, fund, equip, and guide the actions of terror organizations like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, the Houthis in Yemen, and others that you'll hear more about when I turn things over to our friend Mandatory Funday. Now, these militant groups then operate as proxy forces for the Iranian regime, advancing Iran's foreign policy aims through both acts of terror and more conventional direct military action, but all while insulating Tehran from direct geopolitical reprisal. Now, inside Iran, the Cuds Force is often referred to as Al-Quds, which loosely translates to either Jerusalem or the Holy One, and that name comes from their long-standing goal of recapturing Jerusalem from Israeli control. But in the modern era, the Cuds Force has tentacles and objectives that extend way beyond Israel. Now, the U.S. Special Operations Command estimates that there might be as many as 33,000 troops that fall directly under the Cuds Force command umbrella, but realistically speaking, there's really no way to know for sure, and the truth of the matter is their total numbers would still only actually represent a pretty small fraction of the Cuds Force real combat and force projection capabilities, because well, after all, their job is to establish insurgent militant groups inside the borders of other nations who can then fight on their behalf. In a way, you could say that Iran uses these proxy forces in a similar capacity to how Russia used to use the Wagner Group back before their invasion of Ukraine. As an independent mercenary organization, the Wagner Group could conduct combat operations on Russia's behalf in places like Africa and the Middle East, and when they got caught doing something that was overtly illegal or otherwise nefarious, Moscow could just deny having anything to do with them. I mean, we saw that happen in 2018 2018's Battle of Qashm in Syria, when 500 Wagner Group mercenaries, backed by 27 vehicles, including T-72 tanks, tried to attack a small group of just 40 American Special Operations troops. The Russians wanted control of SDF-occupied oil fields, so they let Wagner off the leash, but when American air power utterly devastated the attacking force, Russia just washed its hands of the operation and claimed to have been no part of it. And that is exactly how Iran leveraged Yemen's Houthis to strike Saudi oil facilities in 2019, temporarily cutting the nation's oil production in half, as just one example. That same year, the Pentagon released a report attributing roughly 1 out of every 6 American combat casualties throughout the entirety of Operation Iraqi Freedom not to Iraqi forces, but rather to Cuds force-backed militias entering Iraq specifically to engage American troops. Now, according to the analysis of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which I do want to note is a Washington-based think tank that is broadly considered to be pro-Israeli, Iranian proxy forces were said to be behind 180 separate attacks on American troops in the Middle East between just October 17th of 2023 and November 19th of 2024 alone. But because of the nature of proxy forces, I've got to acknowledge that it is tough to say how many of those attacks may have been directly ordered by Iran's Quds force and how many were just enabled by Iranian support. And whether or not you even see a distinction between those in terms of Iran's culpability is, to be honest, up to you. As such, saying that Iran provides support and refuge for internationally recognized terrorist organizations would really be a pretty big understatement. Instead, Iran should be seen as the linchpin in a globe-spanning network of paramilitary factions that are working together toward common goals under the guise of loosely affiliated Islamist groups. But what are these groups? Where do they operate? And what sorts of threats do they actually present? For that, I'm going to turn it over to everyone's favorite intel officer, Mandatory Funday.
Iran's proxy network is mostly built through the IRGC, especially the Cuds force, which since the 1980s has funded, trained, armed, and advised non-state groups across the region as a way to project power without relying only on Iran's regular military. CFR says the IRGC began sponsoring armed groups in the 1980s and developed ties across Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories, and elsewhere. The Associated Press and CFR both describe this broader system as the backbone of Iran's regional influence. So let's talk about the groups specifically. First, you got Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the oldest and most important example. The Associated Press has noted that Iran's arming of Shiite forces in Lebanon in the 1980s helped create Hezbollah during the conflict with Israel. That makes Hezbollah the prototype for Iran's modern proxy model, a force with rockets and drones, political influence, and experience fighting a conventional military. Its specialties are rocket and missile attacks, drone launches, border warfare, and sustained pressure on Israel. In a wider war, Hezbollah's most likely targets are northern Israel, Israeli military sites, border communities, and potentially strategic infrastructure. Although, it has been reported Hezbollah is weaker and more constrained than it used to be after recent fighting. Next, we have Iraqi Shiite militias, which are a big lane. The Associated Press says Iran's proxy expansion accelerated after the 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, when Tehran backed Shiite armed groups that later became some of the most powerful militias in the country. Numerous sources describe Iraq as one of the places where Iran wields influence through militias and aligned political actors. These groups specialize in rocket fire, one-way drones, roadside-style attacks, harassment of U.S. positions, and political military pressure inside Iraq. If Iran wants to hit back indirectly at the United States, these militias are among the most immediate tools because of geography alone. Their likely targets would be U.S. troops, bases, logistics routes, embassies, and allied positions in Iraq and Syria. Then we've got the Houthis in Yemen, and they are a different kind of proxy. Commentary on them says Iran backed the Houthi movement as part of the wider axis of resistance, though this relationship developed later than Hezbollah's and has evolved over time. Multiple sources report, and they make it clear, that the Houthis have become one of Iran's most useful indirect tools for maritime disruption. Their specialty is missiles and drones aimed at shipping lanes and long-range harassment, especially in and around the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. Sources note that the Houthis attacked more than 100 ships in one of their recent campaigns, and Reuters has long documented Iran's support relationship with them. In a broader war, the Houthis are most likely to target commercial shipping, naval traffic, and trade routes because that is how they can create global economic pain without directly fighting the U.S. in a conventional sense. Next, you have Hamas and Palestinian militant groups. Iran has also supported Palestinian militant groups, including Hamas, even though Hamas is Sunni and Iran presents itself as the protector of Shiite power. The Associated Press notes that Iran has armed Sunni militants when it sees strategic value in doing so. Hamas' specialty has been cross-border raids, rocket fire, urban irregular warfare, and political symbolic attacks against Israel. In a broader Iran war, Hamas would historically fit the lane of pressuring Israeli cities, border zones, and internal security bandwidth. But recent reporting also says Iran's network is weaker than it used to be, and Hamas has been badly degraded compared with earlier periods. So Hamas is still part of the story historically, but less likely to be the central tool now. Iran also built influence through Syria, especially during the Syrian civil war, when it is said that Tehran strongly backed Bashar al-Assad. So Syria has functioned less like one single proxy force and more like a corridor and operating environment for Iran-backed militias, weapons movement, and regional logistics. The specialties here are sustainment, transit, launch points, and territorial depth rather than one neat militia brand. In war, these networks can support attacks on Israel, U.S. positions in Syria, and supply lines across the Levant. The honest bottom line here is, basically the simplest summary. Hezbollah is the heavy hitter against Israel. Iraqi militias are the most direct pressure tool against U.S. troops and bases. The Houthis are the economic pain lever against shipping and maritime traffic. Hamas and other Palestinian militants matter historically, but are less central right now. And Syrian networks help connect and support the whole system. And the biggest current caveat is this. It's been reported by numerous sources, and they suggest Iran's proxy bench is more damaged, more fragmented, and more politically constrained than the old axis of resistance image implies. So the network still matters, but it does not centrally mean Iran can flip one switch and unleash the same level of coordinated proxy warfare people imagine from older headlines.
And with that ends yet another edition of Firepower from Sandboxx News, with some huge help from our friend Mandatory Funday. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and I mean that, subscribe to both of our channels. And then make sure to leave us a comment so we know what you think of this format and what topics you'd like to see us team up on again in the future. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News, or from Mandatory Funday for that matter.